Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update. First part though for the 16th of February 2025. If we go to my YouTube page, I get confused because I now have my NAFO avatar up there. I am at present 7 away from my absolute goal. After I'm going to retire, probably after today. So I've always wanted, ever since I was born, I came out of my mother's womb and I was like 50,000. I could already do numbers at that age, which is pretty amazing. 50,139 is the only number worth thinking about. So 50,139 is the goal for my subscribers for YouTube. And I wanted to get that by the 2nd of January. That was my goal. But I forget that calendars and Gregorian calendar. Anyway, when I did my research into ancient chronology, it turns out actually it equates to the 16th of February 2025. So if I get 50,139, that's just another 7 today, then I am going to have a party, and you guys are all invited, and we will have a party this week. You're all invited. It will be online and it will look like me talking to you about the Ukraine war, but we can imagine we're like dancing, having fun, drinking, or not drinking, depending on what your predilections are like. Anyway, that aside, so essentially, please like, subscribe, and share. Please get me to 50,139. It makes absolutely no difference to to me, because people watch my stuff anyway, whether they're subscribed or not. Blah blah blah. But it will make me all warm and fuzzy inside, and who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want that? Right. Let's shut up, Piers. Let's get on with military aid. Okay, what do we have? Well, not a lot of actual stuff we're going to talk about today, but quite a lot of discussion about a more abstract sense of military aid and a few plans going forward. Max24 refers to a Forbes article. Ukrainian drones can now hide underwater and attack from the depths, according to Forbes. A quadcopter that lands on the water, sinks, and then launches its rotors and rises into the air again has been developed here. So you can see that. I don't know how well that would be able to come out of a very rough sea or something like that. But anyway, this is definitely an evolution of drone capability. So Ukrainian radio technology specialists have showed that it can rise up again, turn off its rotors. I don't know if it's kind of submerges but stays steady at some kind of depth, or whether it just sink. You'd assume it wouldn't just sink, otherwise it's fairly useless. But yeah, I wonder what they would be able to do with something like that. I guess lay in waiting along the Kherson River, or maybe in the Zaporizhia area, like the Zaporizhia reservoir, somewhere around there. I don't know. Let me know what you think that could be used for. Answers on a postcard. Now, Zelensky's called for the creation of an army of Europe amid US support uncertainty. Now, there's been all of this crazy conversation from the Munich Security Conference. Okay, let's talk about the good things that came out of the Munich Security Conference as far as the US and Europe. The good thing is that there are many in Europe that now recognise they need to step up. Europe needs to step up big time. And that means spending more. That means scaling up production. That means sorting out their own security and moving away from the US and dependence on the US. Then we get into the whole debate as to whether this is actually good for Europe or good for the US, or bad for Europe, bad for the US, no matter which way you go here. And the answer, as I've given you many times before, is it's complicated, and there will be advantages for both in a decoupling of Europe from the US, and disadvantages for both. So an advantage for Europe is they get to dictate their own security strategies. They are responsible for their own security, and they can also marry that with an industrial and technological strategy as well, so that economically speaking, they're investing in their own defense industries to produce jobs and whatnot in Europe, and that is good for Europe. The negative for Europe is that actually the US is providing a lot of security oversight, and then they can spend money on other things rather than on militaries, so schools, hospitals, whatever. Now, from a US point of view, they will be spending less, but in spending less, they have to draw many of those troops away from Europe. Europe will be spending more on their own military industrial complex, so there'll be a lot of really upset military concerns in the US that will not get investment now from Europe. You would then get US pulling troops back, and essentially those troops cutting back the armed forces. Now, you can argue that's something that they need to do. Some people say that's a really good thing. Other people will be like, well, that's going to be a problem for the economy. You're going to have more unemployed people, then the knock-on effects of that in terms of supply chains and all sorts. Okay, but you could see that's positive. Then you will have the US not having a say in European security matters as much as they previously have done. So the point is that, okay, we'll provide the oversight for you guys. We'll do the heavy lifting in terms of security, which some people are really pissed off about. But with that, the US gets to dictate what goes on in Europe, and that fits into their geopolitical strategy. And they can use Europe as a launch, sort of a springboard into the Middle East, into Africa, down into the Red Sea, etc., etc. Okay, so the problem is, if you demand that Europe pays more, does more, etc., etc., then Europe stands on its own 2 feet, and the US recedes. Now, this fits in line with the kind of America first, and I would say it's not really America first, it's America alone strategy, which is America isolating itself from the world. We're not going to worry about you lot. We're not going to spend all that money. But the problem is, you stop spending money on USAID, on the CIA, on defense, on departments that sort out Russian oligarchs, is you lose influence around the world, and you cede power to some degree, the EU. So EU becomes arguably more powerful, but really it's China and Russia who benefit from that. So in this game of chess that's going on around the world, the US is receding. There's no doubt about it that you can't expect to be more powerful by paying less for stuff or paying for less stuff. So we're going to completely defund US aid until everyone kicks off, and then you have to you have to restart that to some degree, but completely defund our soft power. We're going to strip back our influence in Europe. Then that will happen because we're demanding Europe stands on its own 2 feet. The US will recede in terms of global hegemony. Now, at the time that all this is happening, and we're getting this kind of potentially even a realignment, some people saying that the US is aligning more with dictators and autocrats and etc., etc. Viktor Orban, both JD Vance and Donald Trump, and indeed Elon Musk, are big fans of Viktor Orban and not of democratically elected leaders in Europe. The only one that they particularly like, really, although he said some quite nice things about Keir Starmer, weirdly, is Giorgia Meloni, but then she is super right-wing. Okay, so do we have an alignment with autocracy? What's going on there? And JD Vance comes over to the Munich Security Conference and then slags off Europe and says, Russia is not your problem, it's your own enemies from within, free speech, etc., etc., and then goes and meets with AfD. Completely looks off Olaf Scholz, democratically elected present leader of Germany, and goes to AfD, who are neo-Nazis, and who now Alice Weidel has come out today and said, we want to start reintegrating with Russia. That's literally who JD Vance has gone to advocate for. Pro-Russian. So you've got your vice president come to Europe supporting pro-Russian political parties in Europe and then slagging off everyone else. But the good thing is, possibly for Europe, is that has kickstarted Europe into doing something. Now, the problem then is, and there's been a few analysts that I've been reading today talking about this, is that Europe, okay, needs to pay more for defense, needs to do X, Y, and Z. All of that costs a lot of money. And the problem here is that the US has gone, right, you're on your own. EU goes, okay, we're on our own. We need to pay for more stuff. Oh dear, we need to put up taxes. So the only way you really borrow more, put up taxes, all of this will not go down particularly well with the electorate, who on these 4-year, 5-year electoral cycles want the welfare state to be better supported by whichever government. So now governments are going to say, right, we're going to have to whack up our defence expenditure as a percentage of the GDP to something like 2.5, maybe even 3%. Some are already above that. They're going to go even higher. You are going to get a lot of people in Europe then go, well, screw you. I'm going to vote for a populist party who are selling me this great dream of solving complex problems with simple answers. And that's exactly what Putin wants. So this idea that Europe have to stand up on their own 2 feet and sort out their own security is, in a weird way, potentially going to help Putin in the long run, because you are going to get some kickback to this for the amount of money that will cost. Meanwhile, US recedes, their soft power recedes, and they are not helping to fight the Russian narrative. The Russian narrative finds more purchase in Europe, and there's an understanding that we need to do more about that, but we can't afford to do more about that because the economies aren't doing as well as we would like, and there's going to be pushback to putting up taxes in order to deal with that. This is a massive geopolitical problem, and it has been expedited by Donald Trump. Now, your man Zelensky here says, let's be clear, we cannot rule out the possibility that America may refuse to cooperate with Europe on issues that threaten it. And that's a problem. Like Zelensky said, we can't rule out the fact that, or the idea that the US might screw over Europe, essentially, and side with Russia. I mean, yeah, it's a big problem. So EU governments will be able to increase military spending without falling foul of the bloc's budget rules over plans to expand what can be classed as defence investment, according to Politico. So the costs of military staffing and equipment maintenance could be considered alongside core defence spending. In other words, they are changing the rules slightly in Europe. This is Ursula von der Leyen and others. The move would allow governments with overstretched budgets more flexibility under the bloc's debt and deficit rules. They understand that no one's going to want to put up taxes. So, how does this look? Can we get people to spend more money and bend the rules to enable that concerning debt and deficits? Now, Ukraine's survival hinges, though, says Zelensky to NBC News. Ukraine's survival does hinge on US military support. Zelensky said on the 14th that it would be, quote, very, very, very difficult for Ukraine to sustain its fight against Russia and remain secure in the long term without American support. And here's the problem. Everyone is trying to navigate this very difficult landscape at the moment, where the US is wanting to recede while also supporting elements within Europe that are very pro-Russian. And Zelensky saying, and yet I still need you. I really need your support, the US. Help me out. And I don't know I don't know how the US really helps Ukraine to the degree that we need them to, that Ukraine needs them to, and indeed the US needs them to, without having to completely prostitute themselves before the US and give away all of these natural resources. Now, we've heard, though, that, well, we'll come on to that a little bit later. So JD Vance has walked back some of his comments on US troops in Ukraine. It doesn't advance American interests. So he said previously that no chance of troops in Ukraine. Then he's had to walk that back. Like Hegseth has walked his stuff back. There's just chaos in the American administration. So even though Vance refused to say that deploying US troops in Ukraine was off the table, he later accused the outlet of twisting his words. However, it's worth noting that the US idea of having troops on the ground in Ukraine will be to defend American interests, as he says, and they will be those mineral resources and rare earth metals and whatnot in Ukraine. So it's about Ukraine giving away 50% of its natural resources to the US saying, okay, and we'll have troops in there. They won't be defending Ukraine. There'll be nothing to do with keeping the peace. They'll just be protecting, rare earth lithium deposits and mines that the Americans are in charge of. Now, there are indeed Republicans who are deeply supportive of Ukraine still. As we know, there are many Republicans there who just seem to be silent. And Lindsey Graham is someone who flip-flops all over the place because of all the pressure that's put on him with the compromise on him from the MAGA GOP. But when he's allowed to say what he wants, goes to somewhere like the Munich Security Conference, or has a breakout session with Zelensky, or is in Ukraine, he says stuff that's really supportive of Ukraine. Actually, he's intuitively, deeply, personally invested in Ukraine prevailing, but then he often has to shut up and say things that kind of go against that because the pressure that's put on him by the party whips. So Lindsey Graham here has said, the Ukrainians taken our weapons and you've kicked the Russians' ass. That's why I'm very proud for you to have you as an ally. How do you deter Putin? You arm this guy, Zelensky, to the teeth. You give him a bunch of F-16s, you give him ATACMS, you give him tanks because they will fight. And that's exactly right. But as someone says below, next week, Graham, my boss Trump says give Russia everything they want or he will kill me as gay. Sorry, you lose. And that's the point. The compromat that's on Lindsey Graham, like someone knows this below, knows exactly what's going on there because, if you know what Lindsey Graham's private life and blah, 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 you know that he's consistently has pressure put on him. And next week he'll be saying something different. But the point is that there are still good Republicans, or Republicans that have good opinions out there on certain things like Ukraine. Now, it's interesting. The Kiel Institute Ukraine tracker has been updated on the 14th, just a couple of days ago, with new figures. And there's just a stark difference between Europe and the United States, and yet we're still hearing. In fact, Trump said the other day that the US has spent something like $300 billion and spent way more than Europe. But the stats, according to Kiel Institute and others, are that Europe has spent more than the US in total allocated aid, and then aid to be allocated, which is, there's an awful lot of stuff still to come from Europe, and they've already outpaced the US. Now, you can argue about these figures, so on and so forth. I'm not actually sure what Europe is defined as in this one, because quite often they talk about EU, so I presume that's including Norway and the UK there. But so lots of new stats coming out from the Kiel Institute. As an individual country, of course, the US is way out in front there. EU as an entity has pretty much matched it pound for pound, really, dollar for dollar in the financial and humanitarian context, but in military aid, the US is way out in front. But of course, it's about adding all of these countries together because they've got much smaller populations and much smaller GDPs as well. So once you do that, then it looks a little bit different. Okay, so moving on, Anton Gerashenko talks about these new figures, and this, for me, this is not about competing. Oh, look, Europe's done better than the US. It's about, hang on, if the president is saying this about US aid to Ukraine and it is incorrect, we need to call it out, and we need accuracy and a good understanding of what's going on. So Gerashenko said, if we look at the numbers, it's obvious how enormous a contribution of the EU to Ukraine's defence has been. To say that the EU helps Ukraine less than the USA is simply untrue. In real terms, the total aid allocated by European countries to Ukraine over the past 3 years surpasses the US, nearing almost 140 billion euros as of February 2025, according to IFW. Even in terms of military support, where the United States has almost limitless resources compared to Europeans, Ukraine is armed with more European provided equipment. The EU supplied more planes, more tanks, more infantry fighting vehicles. Europeans are even responsible for providing more Patriots to Ukraine than Washington. According to publicly available data from Oryx, the contribution of Europe and the US to Ukraine, broken down by main types of arms, is as follows. Europe supplied Ukraine with 51 planes of different types, and another 85 are waiting to be delivered. The USA has supplied 0. So that stat alone is, phenomenal. Helicopters, Europe has supplied 73. USA has supplied 21. Tanks, Europe has supplied 887 tanks, and the USA has supplied 31 Abrams and paid for 45 Soviet T-72s that were modernized in Czechia to give to Ukraine. Infantry fighting vehicles, Europe has supplied 1,086 and the USA 300. Towed artillery, according to public data, US has supplied 259, and Europe has provided less here, 183, but the real numbers are likely higher as many countries were not open about their deliveries as the US was. And here's a problem. There are a number of countries like France and Finland who do not announce what they have given. So actually the official numbers are somewhat unknown in terms of these pieces of equipment. You know, Finland has given a phenomenal amount considering the size of their country and the GDP, and yet we don't know what they've given. Self-propelled guns, Europe has supplied 762, so these are howitzers but on wheels or tracks, and USA has provided 18. 762 to 18. And multiple launch rocket systems, US has provided 40 HIMARS, Europe has supplied 28 HIMARS and analogues like the M270, as well as over 50 post-Soviet MLRS models. So again, outstripping the Americans there. Ukraine received 2 batteries of Patriots from the US, and the Europeans provided 3 batteries and 6 line batteries. 1 Patriot battery consists of up to 8 line batteries. From Germany, 5 line batteries from the Netherlands, 1 battery from Romania, paid for by the US and Norway, 2 SAMP-T batteries, French, Italian Patriot analogues. And just to make things clear, it's not the final official data, but analysis of only the open source information. Yes, a lot of this equipment is US made, but it was EU countries or European countries who bought it for Ukraine or gave the AFU their stocks, sometimes draining their own supplies completely, and placed new orders with US companies. The US has played a crucial role in Ukraine's defence so far, of course, and Europeans will need to step up their contributions, spending, and overall focus on defence. If the US were to take a more hands-off approach, I won't pretend that it will be easy. What I'm saying is that the time has come for Germany and France to take a leadership role and build the defence sector according to the level of threat. Then Europe could guarantee its own security. The way towards increasing Europe's role in the continent's defence is clear. Now priorities are being set, spending is being planned, coordination is happening. Defence and security are a long-term task for the EU. The Ukraine issue is key. What we need is not a quick ceasefire at any cost, but a stable peace and a deterrence of a new war. We need a clear understanding of Ukraine's place and role in European security architecture. This is the foundation. A strong Ukraine is a strong Europe. A strong Ukrainian army is a key towards deterring Russia. Europe has already shown itself as one of the most reliable and generous partners of Ukraine, a partner that is capable of putting their priorities straight. As always, I'm grateful to have our European neighbours on our side, and I'm confident, he says, as a Ukrainian, that whatever the future holds, together, Europe and Ukraine can persevere and emerge stronger. Now, we are hearing from, this is Annalena Baerbock, the Foreign Minister. In fact, I watched this whole panel discussion last night, because that's how cool I am. Even when I'm playing, you know, Sherman Leader or World of Tanks on the PlayStation as a kind of bit of unwinding, I'm 100% of the time listening to videos. In fact, all day, no matter what I'm doing, whether I'm driving in the car, sitting on the toilet, playing a game, I'm always listening to stuff. Like, that is my life these days. But this is Annalena Baerbock on Taurus. Oh, it hasn't got the English, so they've dubbed over it. Basically, she is advocating for Taurus. So the analog of the Scalp EG or the Storm Shadow missile. Now, we've heard Friedrich Merz, who is likely the incoming Chancellor, quote, "We should be willing to deliver Taurus cruise missiles, but only if we have the agreement of European partners." Some people are like, oh, really? You're still putting these constraints on giving Taurus? But in reality, the agreement of European partners, so he says here we've got it, an agreement within the European partners, and there are at least 2 who are delivering missiles, cruise missiles, as the UK and France. Really? Like, I don't know why he would have to ask that. But if it's UK and France, he will get permission. Like, we'll be like, well, yeah, we're giving them, so go for it. Well done, mate. I don't think that's an issue. But it is a bit annoying that there's still kind of some constraints being applied. But anyway, it's looking good for Taurus. So that's the main takeaway there. And now, talking about Germany, it's a bit vibes based, says Fabian Hoffman. Analysis on my behalf, as I don't have exact data for most weapon systems, but the industrial output capacity has started to make significant leaps in the last few months, notably in Germany, but also beyond. What's somewhat depressing is that there's an increase in capacity still seems almost exclusively fueled by demand side factors on the open market, i.e. there's no real targeted effort at growing capacities through targeted investments by public actors. What he means there is that there is scale growing within Europe, and he's probably talking mainly about Germany. But unfortunately, that comes not from strategic planning, but from the demand from private concerns, or like Ukraine putting an order into a German concern, or even the German government just ad hoc putting orders in. But there's not, the idea here for me is that there's no strategic planning centrally from the government saying, right, you need to, or I guess we need to put in a massive set of orders going forward for the next 5 years in order to justify you ramping up your production. And we need to do that because that will actually play an important part in our own security as well as Ukraine's. And for any libertarians out there, of course, this is all kind of pie in the sky, this, because as a libertarian country, you wouldn't have an army. It was all, oh, we don't have central government. We don't believe in paying tax. Oh, we've just been invaded. Oh, I've been killed. Oh, well. Yeah, so anyway, that side. I'm not advocating for a planned economy, but the results in some industries that require large upfront investments, for example, cruise missile production, not expanding and producing at the required scale. I think there can be a better mix of public and private investment. So in other words, you know, no one can buy Storm Shadows and Scalp EGs really at the moment because they've stopped building them because they didn't have the orders in, and they're getting a new missile in soon. Now, if you're a government saying, actually, we need to make sure you are still making them for security reasons, not this isn't a free market, and we're not you're not shutting down because no one's ordering them. You're going to keep building them because we want a massive stockpile ourselves because of what's going on around the world. And with the cruise missiles side of thing, that should have been somewhere where, like, the UK, France, Italy, and Germany were ramping up production 2-3 years ago to make sure that Ukraine were getting supplied with them consistently. Now, I mean, really, Ukraine need just cruise missiles being fired at Russia every single day. They're not getting that because they don't have them, and they are expensive, right? Now, Zelensky's discussed expanding cooperation with Rheinmetall and their CEO, Armin Papiga. Ukraine is ready to scale up joint efforts in ammunition, armoured cars and air defence, and successful tech repairs and production localisation. A stronger Ukraine means a safer Europe, Zelensky added, and that's absolutely right. So we hear that undeterred after recently being targeted by a Russian assassination attempt, the CEO of German defence giant Rheinmetall says they will build a third factory in Ukraine. In a conversation on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference, Papiga also expressed admiration for the courage of Ukrainians. Quote, how they resist and how they ultimately fight for their freedom. I think no one could believe it when the war began. Everyone first thought, my God, they will be conquered in 2 or 3 months. But no, it turned out to be completely different, said the head of the defence concern. So a third plant will be opened. Their readiness to double production in Europe and his attitude toward the plans to assassinate him. He spoke about with DW, Deutsche Welle. So anyway, Max24 then reports that Rheinmetall has increased production of 155mm artillery, and this is something that Papiga said as well. 155mm artillery shells by another 50,000, bringing it to now they are producing 750,000 shells a year. And of course, this is massively important for Ukraine. They need a sustained and increased provision of shells. Now, Thales, the French, I think slightly multinational, but mainly French military industrial concern, and Ukroboronprom, the Ukrainian state concern, will establish a joint venture in Ukraine. The newly created company will focus on developing innovative technologies in fields such as air defense systems, radar systems, electronic warfare, as well as tactical communications and optoelectronic systems. In addition to the joint venture, Thales has a long history of cooperation with the Ukrainian defense industry and provides support for its products within the Ukrainian defense forces. These are the products manufactured by Thales and delivered to Ukraine so far. Control Master 200 system and the Ground Master 200 radar and control view, GBAD, ground-based air defense command and control. Night Rise goggles, HBD2A2 anti-tank mines, Arabelle radar for the SAMP-T system, Thales Australia's Australian Combat Assault Rifle, ACAR, and also was also supplied to Ukraine. But there are also other things as well. Thales is responsible for the NLAW and they make that in Northern Ireland, and the British have supplied, with the Norwegians, I think, as well, maybe, a whole bunch of N-Laws, but certainly the British. I don't know, actually, it may not be the Norwegians at all. No, it might have been. Anyway, so much happened to this war, I've forgotten. French aid to Ukraine also says, quoting from the Financial Times, once again, Macron urged Europe to wean itself off reliance on buying US weaponry, a long-held priority of France. So this is going back to the idea of the decoupling of Europe from America, from the US. So Macron has urged Europe to wean itself off reliance on buying US weaponry, a long-held priority of France, saying partners should be buying the Franco-Italian SAMP-T air defense system. He said it was better than the Patriot, the US equivalent already used by several EU countries. This is exactly my point, is that you are now going to see, and it's written into the defense strategy of the EU, that they're going to have to procure 60% of all of their defense equipment from within the EU. You are going to get the Americans, the American economy or the American military industrial sector suffering as a result of this decoupling. And it's going to be interesting because I wonder how much the American government are now going to be lobbied by the military industrial complex, who are going to be deeply worried because they're building this stuff, they're making a lot of money off this, and they're going to be deeply worried that the US is going into a period of complete isolationism and receding from the world. And these guys are going to be like, hang on, you're saying that the EU has to stand up and spend more money itself, but actually that means that they're going to be spending less money inside the US. And that's definitely going to happen. Emmanuel Macron is telling you that this will happen. But he's been saying that for years. So, this is expediting something that some Europeans have wanted for a long time. Rory Stewart, the former Conservative MP, incredibly knowledgeable of international affairs. He's served in the army. He's walked across Afghanistan. He's done all sorts of crazy things. He is, I think, a brilliant commentator. He ran for Conservative Mayor of London. He said Trump cannot decide whether he wants allies to depend. And this, by the way, this is exactly on point. Trump cannot decide whether he wants allies to depend on the US so he can bully them and extract revenue, or whether he wants allies entirely independent of US financial and military power and therefore of US influence. He seems to prefer the short-term heist. That is exactly it. This is the argument I've been talking about for months. You've heard me, and now it's coming to fruition. But the argument it's not easy, right? There is no, this is a dilemma for Americans. Like, the more you spend on European security, it is, you do get a return on investment. And I don't think Trump has understood that. So he's like, look at how much we're spending. They need to do their own stuff. Okay, they're doing their own stuff. Oh, now they're not buying any of our things. We pulled all our armed forces out of Europe. We now don't have the influence, and we've had to give unemployment benefit, and now blah, 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 blah. And now we're getting lobbied by all sorts of people. And that's the reality of the situation. I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, by the way, but there are challenges with each of these positions. You look like you're spending too much on Europe. We need to spend less on Europe. Okay, we'll do that. Oh, no. EU has not built its defences because the US stopped it from doing so. It won't happen before a significant strategic break with the US. What is puzzling, says Bruno McCase, is the same people criticise the lack of resources and a possible break. And that's a problem, is that it's a dilemma. Like, don't do this, but we need to do this. French aid to Ukraine, and this is just an example of what you might see. And I don't know if this has anything to do, I mean, this is probably long in the making, this kind of decision. But Ireland could be about to sign a contract costing between 600 and 800 million euros for new armoured vehicles for the Irish Defence Forces. And who are they doing that with? With France. And Ireland are quite a big member of the EU, so they're quite pro-EU. That's according to a French military industrial official speaking to a government defence and European Affairs Committee in Paris. It's understood that several countries are being looked at, but sources have said that French firm KNDS is the most enticing prospect. During assessments, it's understood that military officers have examined the options. Sources said the French deal is particularly interesting as it offers 3 types of vehicles in one deal. It may also be the most cost effective, with ease of getting spare parts. And that's it, getting spare parts. France is there, Ireland is there. There you go, spare parts, just there. It's not like, oh, it's got to come over from America or from here or there. And I just think you're going to see more of this going forward, a lot more of this. Now, I went through this thread previously, but just to let you know that the Russians are looking at recruiting Muslims more by offering them free trips to Hajj. That's the trip to Mecca. And there are 14 million Muslims in Russia, 10% of the population indeed. And so this is quite a big potential pool of recruits, and they're really going after them by trying to, attract them with essentially with money. Again, suggests to me that they're desperate for boots on the ground, and it's becoming very expensive for the Russians to continue to attract troops. Now, then you talk about military industrial complexes and how much like the free market needs to be aligned to any given country's geopolitical foreign policy strategy. So India is part of BRICS, right? And here we're now hearing Thomas Steiner says Trump is selling F-35s to India, and he's giving Russia and China 100% of the data about the secret capabilities, electronic warfare systems, radar and data links of the F-35. It's stupid and treasonous. So I don't know enough about this, but what an interesting situation where a member of BRICS, a country that is arguably more aligned to, is quite transactional, India, but yeah, it doesn't look good sending them F-35s, but then, hey, making a quick buck. Bloomberg reports Trump offers the F-35 jet to India and to deepen defense ties. So remember, India, Modi was just with Trump, I think, wasn't he? Modi met with Elon Musk, and there was all this controversy. Like, what the hell is he doing meeting with Elon Musk? Is Elon Musk now the president? Anyway, the latest US salvo to weaken Modi's close military ties with Russia. So you can see this in two ways. And I talked about this with regard to Serbia. Like with the French trying to sell stuff to Serbia, it's like, we want you on side. We want you to eschew like Russian military equipment and take on European stuff, because then we can influence you and we can hold you to account and like, well, you won't be able to maintain those planes now, because if you don't do this, we won't support those planes, and then it becomes problematic. So it's a way of getting that country to kind of be part of your orbit, part of your sphere of influence. Now, India is 1 billion people; it's a big old country. Is that something you can do with India? But there are going to be fights over whether you have countries in a Russian sphere of influence in terms of like a military ecosystem. You end up buying these surface-to-air missile systems, and that's 30 years, 40 years of support and maintenance, and you are then in the Russian ecosystem. Then you're buying this other thing from Russia and that other thing. Now, the Russian military industrial complex has been absolutely battered by the war in Ukraine. And they've slipped from the second biggest arms exporter to, I can't imagine they're even in the top 10 anymore. Just like that. So it could be that India needs some stuff and they would otherwise go to Russia, but Russia is just not in a position to be able to provide it. Like the amount of Su-57s they're producing a year is not up to what they need in order to export. And so India will be looking elsewhere. And the F-35 is a good jet that has loads of potential going forward. If they get India on their side, then that's India under the sphere of influence of the US. But the flip side, I mean, there are two arguments going on here, and I don't know the answer. But you got Thomas Steiner saying it's stupid and treasonous. They are going to have access as a kind of quasi-enemy, not quite an enemy, but you're in BRICS, right? And now you're going to have our best fighter and knowledge of how it works, and et cetera, et cetera. And you still have these close ties with Russia and China. What the hell are you doing, the US? And then the other side of the argument is, yeah, we want to bring them over to our side. I don't know. So what else do we have? I wish the EU would establish a local program to buy up all the serious weapons and ammo for cash and ship it to Ukraine. So this is the news that in Syria, there's a huge looting going on here at the Kalkala Air Base, and it's out of control. People looting everything, warplanes, ammunition, even cables for copper, and digging trenches. Hundreds of tons of explosives are stored there. Calls to secure the AB remain unanswered. And this is all equipment that the Ukrainians could have done with. and it's just been totally looted. And you're thinking, who the hell's getting their hands on that? So that's a real missed opportunity there. Fabian Hoffman again says, for context, enriching uranium from natural levels 0.7% to 60% requires approximately 80 to 85% of the separation work. In other words, if you're enriching uranium to make nuclear weapons, the big work is done in getting the enriched uranium from 0.7% to 60%. And then the rest is somewhat easier. In turn, enriching from 60% to 90%, U235, represents only 15 to 20% of the total effort. What's he talking about here? Okay, so now we know that. We have news that Iran will likely have 250 kilograms of uranium enriched up to 60% in March, which is 6 quantities of nuclear material for which the possibility of manufacturing a weapon cannot be excluded. In other words, Iran is looking like they are going to be able to have nuclear weapons. What is, for example, the US doing about that? Something to keep one's eyes on. And then finally, we're just going to go back to this idea of giving away, or the US demanding that Ukraine give away its mineral resources so that that can pay for all the stuff that the US has previously given to Ukraine. But of course, you don't have the EU saying that in light of stats that are outstripping the United States. So the United States says we want $500 billion worth of natural resources to pay for the, $120 billion worth of stuff that we have and will give. So, where's Europe in this? Nonetheless, Timothy Milovanov, and it's interesting, like I refer to him an awful lot, Kiev School of Economics, was a former economy minister for Ukraine. He was on Channel 4 News the other night. I was like, I got dead excited. I'm so sad. I was like, hey, it's Milovanov. And he was brilliant on Channel 4 News, and quite a long interview with him. Anyway, he said, Zelensky said, I've blocked the agreement with Trump on mineral rights as it does not protect Ukrainian interests. Then he goes diplomatic. It must be legally correct regarding investments and security guarantees. I don't yet see in the document, which I think the hint here from Milovanov is that he's gone diplomatic. In other words, we're not getting screwed over by the US, but he uses diplomatic speak in order to say we haven't signed it for X and Y reasons, but essentially it's like, no, screw you, we ain't signing that. That's freaking terrible. Zelensky about meeting in Saudi Arabia. I haven't seen any invitations for Ukraine to meet with envoys. We have no documents or negotiations with our strategic partners. Russia is not one of them. Although we are hearing just now that they might well be allowed to go to Saudi Arabia now, where people are going to be discussing their future. To defend against a potential Russian offensive, we need not 50, 100 or 300,000. European leaders understand we need... what's he talking about? To defend... I guess these are troops to defend in the ceasefire. Peacekeepers. We need not 50, 100 or 300,000. I don't know what he's saying they do need. European leaders understand this and are considering the financial implications. No, that's in Ukraine. Losing the alliance between Europe and the US will benefit only Putin and North Korea. Absolutely correct. And if Putin only wants a ceasefire to ease his isolation, that's not real peace. The US holds key political power and its approach to Russia matters. If Trump can push Putin toward genuine peace, we may achieve real security guarantees for the first time if all sides, especially America, are ready. European leaders, once more skeptical than the US, are now more ready to support Ukraine. They understand the danger. Putin will come, not if he comes. Putin will come, not if he comes. He may test NATO, and without strong sanctions and unity between the EU and the US, that is very dangerous. Everyone needs to get used to the fact that Ukraine can no longer be told where to be. Strong security guarantees are not possible without US troops on the borders or front lines, and must include US and European partners. Without the US, it's weak. The number of troops matters, and for now, Europe alone is not enough. On elections, no one raises the issue at a high level except Putin, sometimes the US. Everyone understands our law and the consequences. The shift to a contract army was the right step, aligning with the US practices. This war isn't just about manpower, but advanced weapons. Now it's about drones and not just tanks. North Korea involvement in the war is a global threat. They've gained experience in missiles, drones and electronic warfare, and they will use it. Defense no longer matters. Missiles and drones fly thousands of kilometers. If Russia wins, others will follow. We must defend values and protect every country, no matter its size. The US needs to see the reality of the war firsthand without outside influence. And this is really important. I'd said to you before, there's just not a big enough knowledge inside the US as to what's going on in Ukraine. From Hegseth to Vance, from Trump to someone like Mike Walls and Keith Kellogg. They need to be there. They need to see and understand. I invited Mr. Kellogg to the front to witness it himself and to speak with our commentators. I want him to bring his understanding to President Trump. After that, we can discuss concrete steps towards our goals. So anyway, there's some thoughts about all sorts of things concerning peace plan and military support for Ukraine coming from Zelensky himself. Thanks a lot for watching. I know this is a much longer one because I haven't done a military aid video, and there's an awful lot of talk with regard to the kind of the politics of military aid to Ukraine. I hope it was useful. Take care, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon.